You and I, every single day, we get up and we make choices about how we're going to behave. When we encounter certain situations or circumstances, we're making judgments about how we're going to respond to those judgments. I would think for us as Christians, we are trying to take a look at how we're responding in direct relationship to how Jesus would want us to respond. But even if that is the case, the question that I want us to reflect on this morning, because it is fundamental, are we fulfilling the law? Are we doing what we've been asked to do because we're trying to achieve an outcome? Or are we doing it because it is really in our best interest? We have been taught from when we were all very small that God sort of sits in the heavens, sits on a big throne, fluffy white beard, watches everything that we do, and judges and assesses us. The book of Revelation makes it clear that there is this judgment, and we as humanity have taken a lot of our behavior, our activity as followers, not as something that is beneficial to us, but as something that is required, because if we don't do it, we don't fulfill it, we don't get into heaven. Any of this sound familiar? The difficulty, though, is, are the laws set forth specifically because it gets us into heaven, or are the laws set forth by God because they are really in our best interest? When Arthur was a little one, and those of us who have kids, right? You don't run out into the middle of the street, right? You don't put your hand by the stove, right? The laws that we lay down are enormous, right? And they go on and on and on. And even when the little kids get to be bigger kids, there's still laws that we set down because we are acting on what is really their best interest and what is good for them. The audience that Jesus is talking to is totally immersed in Exodus, where the Ten Commandments are. They are trained, drilled 100% into exactly what those 10 commandments are and what they're all about and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Indeed, all through Deuteronomy and parts of Leviticus, it's all about laws. It's all about the 667, I think there are, of them, where every single law is related to some sort of activity. So they lived their entire life, the Jewish people. Jesus grew up living his entire life following the rules, following the laws, not for the sake of anything else, but for the sake of following the law, because that is what God had commanded of you. What is really interesting here, which there's a number of different things I think we need to take a look at. First of all, as Christians, I do not know how we look at the Hebrew scriptures, quote unquote, Old Testament, without looking and comparing it to what it is that Jesus says when he walks the face of the earth. Okay? Jesus says that he comes not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law, which means that in his words and in his teachings, there is a stretching that is taking place about what is the understanding of the purpose and the meaning of the laws. We are very quick at taking sentences and statements out of the Hebrew scriptures and slinging them around as though they have absolute complete authority now, but they do not seem to reflect exactly what was the heart, the teachings, and the actions of Jesus Christ. So as Christians, we don't have a choice but to, because we call ourselves Christians, to look at even the Hebrew scriptures and try to understand them in light of how and what Jesus said and did and what it is that he is teaching. Because he's declaring, I'm not coming to, destroy or deny, I'm coming to fulfill. The two that I want to focus on today, one about murder, the other about lust, these two specifically, Jesus takes an understanding that was very common for his audience, for his culture, and he reflects on it, and he not simply tries to make it more important. He doesn't double down on it. He actually shifts it, and he moves it from an activity of murder or lusting or adultery, right? He moves from that to where is your heart? And that concept about where is your heart is all about relationship. The law in and of itself, there could be an argument that the law was simply about these are the things you do, this is how you respond to a situation, you do this because this is our culture, this is our tradition, this is what we're taught, but it's not relational. It's not relational to God, and it's not relational to one another. It is a silo experience of I do these things, and therefore I am righteous. Matthew makes it perfectly clear at the beginning of this gospel, unless your holiness exceeds that of the Sadducees and Pharisees. Well, it would be like, unless your holiness exceeds that of the Pope, Mother Teresa, go on and on. Unless your holiness surpasses those, that's what he's comparing, that's what he's challenging his audience to look at. The people who are leaders and respected within the traditions of their Judaism, the teachers of the law, Jesus calls them out and says that they're not getting anywhere. And they're not getting anywhere because they are following the law and not the heart of the law. What really amazes me about all this is how much God is truly concerned about our relationships, how we relate to ourselves and to one another. So let's talk about this murder. Perfectly clear, understood. In Judaism, in Exodus, you murder, you're liable to judgment, right? Murder, very clear taking of one person's life. There's no other translation in the Hebrew. It speaks just like that. It specifically speaks to an incident where one person takes another person's life. Now, Jesus shifts all that and wants us to consider that even if we have anger, even if we have anger in our hearts, that we are betraying and not following that commandment. And I assure you, Jesus' audience all sat there and went, huh? Because it was never taught like that. But see, Jesus' point is about relationship. And it's not just about relationship with one another, but also with yourself. Look, how many of us know people who are angry and live their lives angry, right? We stumble up against them all the time. And you really can't put your finger on it, but you know that something happened in their life that has made them the way they are. Jesus' teaching is meant to help us heal ourselves as well as be in relationship with one another. In other words, what is best for us as God's creation is to let go of anger. Now, look, let's be honest. Anger, lust, these are healthy in and of themselves inclinations. Let's not turn into purists and say, I'm never going to be angry, because I assure you, when you hit the traffic outside, you will, and that'll be that, and we'll be starting all over again. The point of the matter, though, is clearly that, anger in and of itself alerts us to an injustice. And so as a trigger to inform us of an injustice, that in and of itself can drive us to action that would correct the injustice. That is healthy use of anger. It does work that way. Even in our relationships, people come to me all the time and they say to me, we're getting, we're going to get a divorce. I'm like, oh, okay. So what are you talking to me for? And they're like, well, my mom says I can't get a divorce until I come and talk to a pastor. Well, thank you, Mom, for me. I'm very grateful for this. This is really very nice. And so I asked them, on what grounds are you getting divorced? Is there infidelity? No, irreconcilable differences. Okay. You are two individual people, different backgrounds, different experiences, different worldviews. Did you think that by getting married you were not going to have irreconcilable differences? Of course you did. I mean, you should have expected it. Somebody should have told you that marriage is about compromise. It's not about getting your way or the other person thinks the way you think. It's not about that at all. It's about a companionship, and it's about collaboration, and it's about compromise. It is. It's just what it is. But she'll say, well, he makes me so angry. And I get really excited. I'm like, great. And they look at me like, huh? Well, what is it that he gets you angry about? And she'll explain what that is. See, I think anger in a relationship indicates that there's an opportunity for growth. I think anger in a relationship on both sides, I think that type of tension and conflict can actually spur, and I've seen it time and time again, if they truly love one another and are willing to do the work, it could take them to a whole different level and experience of their love. Because they're being honest about what it is that really ticks them off about the other one, or whatever it is they or she or whatever are doing. So the point would be that there's an opportunity here to do that, and I think Jesus is sort of saying the same. For us in our relationship with ourselves and in our relationships with one another, anger in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's what do we do with the anger? And that's the issue that I think Jesus points out, that really for his audience are all sitting there going, so who judges that? And Jesus' point would be, you do. Your heart guides you through the process. And if you don't process the anger, if you don't let it go, you end up personally being deeply hurt and carrying this stuff for a very long period of time. I've been at people's bedsides. I'm sure you have as well. They are carrying things with them from when they were kids. Justifiable. Some of it is horrendous. God bless you. Some of it is horrendous. Should have never happened to any individual. But what they have spent their life doing is just churning that over and over and over again. And ultimately, the lack of forgiveness hurts them more than the original event could have ever actually, caused. Jesus is asking us to stop following the law for the law's sake and to follow it because it is in our best interest for self-help, but also for relational help. Now let's talk about this issue around lust. Now, we know out of Exodus, adultery was totally banned. And understandable. I want you to step out of our society today where women share equal rights, have power, authority, have abilities, are respected as, across society. You got to put yourself into a society where none of that exists. The fact that Jesus actually brings this up, that he talks about the value of a woman and that she should not be not simply, a person used physically, but also internally, that men do not have the right to use another woman for their own mental pleasure and stimulation, is radical. It is radical. Jesus' audience, they don't look at women that way. It's not part of the culture. It's not part of the structure. We look at it and we go, well, that sort of makes sense. But for Jesus, for the first time around, for people hearing this, Jesus is challenging his people to say, hey, you are not allowed, again, all about relationships, you are not allowed to use one another for your own pleasure. You're not. And that highlights women, and Jesus' audience, probably a good number of them being men, would have sat there and would have been like, where is this coming from? Where is this found? The Ten Commandments makes it clear. I can't commit adultery. Doesn't say anything about all this other stuff. And yet Jesus is diving in deeper and pulling out of the Hebrew Scriptures a deeper sense of what it is that we're supposed to be for our own good, for our own mental and spiritual health, but also out of respect for every other single individual. It amazes me just how obsessed God is with our relationships. How we relate to ourselves, how we relate to one another, and how we relate to him. Which ultimately says something about how God, in and of himself, God's character, is really all about, has got to be about relation. And so Jesus comes along and pushes this entire audience, much to the annoyance and probably the hatred of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but he pushes them to the point of saying, no, this is not enough. The law, the printed law, just doing what the law says isn't enough. There is a process that has to take place within each and every one of us that we end up respecting ourselves, and ultimately by doing that, we're also respecting and in a best relationship with one another. So, somewhere around Thursday or Friday of this week, I became pretty So I wrote down in my notes, who then is without sin? Right? Jesus puts all this forth. Who? Who then is truly without sin? And I found myself sort of crying out to him, going, okay, I get this. I can understand that we will try day after day to get up and to live this the best we can. But if I'm up by 7:30, I assure you by 8 o'clock, something's already gone wrong. And so the point I was sort of crying out to God, going, so who then is without sin? Who? Who is perfect? Who's entitled to your love? Who gains your love? And it just became totally clear to me that for us, it's not possible. It's not possible. That's why we need Jesus. For us, it's not possible, but that's why we need Jesus. That's why we need shelter. That's why we need a refuge. That's why when we're broken, Jesus stands in our place, and the Father no longer sees us, but he sees his Son. And in seeing his Son, he embraces his Son, therefore, he also embraces us. It doesn't mean that we get away with not trying to live up to what it is that Jesus is asking us to do, because Jesus isn't asking us to do it so we could get into heaven. On the cross and the resurrection, all of that is taken care of. It is. It's done. It's all finished. It's all complete. The reason we do what Jesus says in the Gospels, especially these stories, these teachings, is so that you and I live the best, fullest life that we possibly can here on earth. That we experience the most joy, the most humanness to our experience as is possible. And it starts by becoming self-aware of some areas of our life that we need to make adjustments and changes. And this is a perfect gospel, because this Wednesday coming up is Ash Wednesday. The following Sunday is the first Sunday of Lent. And we as a community are going to be asked in our gathering times in prayer and worship. We are going to be asked to consider what are the parts and spaces of our lives that need to be rebuilt, restructured, revisited, just looked at. And that we have to be honest and say, on some of this, I'm a total mess. I'll try and work on this. I'm not going to be here next Sunday, but Ray's coming in. But you're going to miss my M&M story, so let me just tell you now. Listen, it's a good M&M story, okay? All right? If you give up M&Ms for Lent, and all that giving up M&Ms does is make you a little bit slimmer than you would be when you started 40 days earlier, that's not the purpose of Lent. If we're not choosing actions, prayer times, thought processes, attentiveness to how we're thinking and loving, if we're not disciplining ourselves in areas that draw us closer to God or to one another, don't do it. Just don't waste your time. Because it's not about us. It's not about us coming out at the end of 40 days going, hey, I didn't have any M&Ms for a whole 40 days. Aren't I wonderful? And we miss the entire purpose of what Lent is really all meant to be about. It's a period of time where the church is invited, if you'd like to participate, to look at a part of your life that you'd like to work on, and that these 40 days, we as a community collectively try to find those areas, and we walk through the season of Lent to better ourselves, because somewhere in the sacrifice, by the time we end up at Good Friday, we just get a better glimpse of what the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross really means. It doesn't come anywhere near to it, but we'll understand the sense of sacrifice and change. And I believe that season is a season of grace. So the Gospels are clear. We have plenty enough to take a look at and figure out where we are in relationship with all that, and to be honest with ourselves. The season of Lent simply continues the process of asking us to be open to have God's grace transform us. God bless you.